The suitcase hit the front porch at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. Marcus Thompson knew the exact time because he checked his phone reflexively when it landed, the way you check a clock during an earthquake, some instinct toward precision when the world loses its shape. The suitcase was the large one, the burgundy Samsonite they'd bought together at the outlet mall 3 years ago for their anniversary trip to Cancun, and it landed on its side with a sound that was somehow both enormous and insufficient for what it represented, contents shifting within it like ballast in a listing ship. His dress shirts came next. Still on hangers. Elena had thrown them from the upstairs window, and they descended in a strange, slow procession, white, blue, gray, the pale yellow one she'd always said made him look distinguished, each one catching the porch light briefly before settling on the steps or the hydrangea bushes or the damp November lawn in a pattern that would have been almost beautiful if Marcus had been capable, in that moment, of seeing anything as beautiful. He was standing on the porch in his undershirt and the sweatpants he'd been wearing when Elena had come downstairs 40 minutes ago with her phone in her hand and a look on her face that he had never seen there before. Not in 7 years of marriage, not in the fights that had come before, not in any of the difficult passages their relationship had navigated. The look was beyond anger. It was beyond hurt. It was the look of a woman who had decided something irrevocably and was now simply executing the decision, cold and certain and entirely closed to incoming information. Get out, she'd said. Just that. Elena, what? My sister is pregnant. The words landed like separate blows, spaced for maximum impact. And she told my mother who you are. The sentence made no sense. He'd stood there making no sense of it while Elena's face did something terrible. Not grief exactly, but the specific, self-protective fury of a woman converting unbearable pain into action before the pain could fully register. Elena, he'd said, very carefully, I don't know what Vanessa told your mother, but whatever she said. Don't. The word was a wall. Don't say her name. Don't stand in my house and say her name like you didn't. I didn't, Marcus said, and he could hear how insufficient it sounded, how every man who had ever done the thing he was being accused of had said those two words in exactly that register. Elena, I didn't. I have never, not once, not ever, I would never. Get out of my house. The capitals were audible. The neighbors were audible. He could hear Mrs. Patterson's television next door go quiet, could sense the specific listening silence of a street that had just registered raised voices. And so he had come outside, and the suitcase had followed, and the shirts, and then a box of his books and his laptop bag and his father's watch, which Elena threw with the same arm she'd used for the books, and which Marcus caught one-handed off the porch railing with a reflex that surprised both of them and which he would think about later as a small, clear metaphor for the life he was about to be required to build, catching what mattered with whatever he had available. He stood on the porch in the November cold and looked at his shirts in the hydrangea bushes, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel, given the devastation of the situation. He felt, underneath the shock, underneath the injury of the accusation itself, the sheer stunning wrongness of being accused of something so fundamental, so violating of everything he was, he felt something click into place. Something that had been misaligned for a long time, something he'd been adjusting around rather than addressing, and that the force of this moment had simply snapped back into its correct position like a dislocated joint relocated by a shock. He felt clarity. He picked up his father's watch from the porch floor and fastened it to his wrist. He collected the shirts from the bushes with the methodical care of a man who had decided that his dignity was not available to be discarded along with his belongings. He packed the Samsonite properly, the way he'd packed it for Cancun, efficient and deliberate. He put everything in his truck. He drove away. He did not call Elena that night. He did not call anyone named Vanessa. He called one person, at 12:31 in the morning, who answered on the second ring because she always answered on the second ring, because she was that kind of person. Vivian, Marcus said, I need a lawyer. Not for business this time. A pause, brief and assessing. Tell me, Vivian Hayes said. He told her. When he finished, Vivian was quiet for 4 seconds. Long by her standards, which told him she understood the gravity. Where are you right now? She asked. Parking lot of a Marriott on Peachtree. Get a room, she said. Sleep if you can. I'll have my family law contact reach out tomorrow morning, and I'm going to need you to start documenting everything, every conversation you've had with Vanessa in the past year, dates, contexts, witnesses. Everything. Another pause. Marcus, are you all right? It was the directness of the question, the absence of preamble or sympathy performance, that made something in his chest briefly loosen. Not yet, he said honestly. I will be. Yes, Vivian said, with the certainty of someone stating a fact they've verified. You will. To understand the accusation, you had to understand Vanessa Reeves. Vanessa was Elena's younger sister by 4 years, and she occupied the specific position in the family architecture of the child for whom ordinary rules had always been negotiable, who had learned early that beauty and volatility in combination could rearrange a room's priorities, who had spent 31 years being forgiven for things that in anyone else would have been unforgivable. She was charming in the way of people who've used charm as survival strategy since childhood, and she was, when she wanted to be, genuinely warm. There had been moments, in the early years of Marcus's marriage to Elena, when he'd thought that underneath the chaos of Vanessa's choices was someone genuinely worth knowing. He'd helped her, more than once, in the way that responsible family members help the volatile one. He'd lent her money 3 times, co-signed nothing because Vivian had told him to co-sign nothing, fixed her car twice, talked her through 2 breakups on the phone at hours that were inconvenient. He'd been, to Vanessa, the thing she didn't have enough of in her own life. Someone stable, someone who showed up, someone whose help came without the manipulation and conditionality that characterized most of her relationships. That was the entirety of what Marcus Thompson was to Vanessa Reeves. Not a lover, not a complication, a steady presence, the way a good foundation is a steady presence, not noticed until the structure above it is suddenly gone. What Vanessa had told her mother was not what Elena believed she'd told her mother. Marcus would learn the shape of it gradually, through the weeks after the eviction, through Vivian's careful reconstruction of who had said what to whom and in what context. What Vanessa had actually said, in a moment of panicked revelation to their mother about her pregnancy, when their mother demanded to know who the father was that it was someone Elena knows, meaning the actual father, a man in Vanessa's social circle whom Elena had met at a birthday party 2 years ago and whose name, in the chaos of the moment, Vanessa hadn't wanted to immediately reveal. What their mother had heard, filtered through decades of watching Vanessa make spectacular choices and a confirmation bias as powerful as any algorithm, was something different. What their mother had told Elena was something constructed from what she'd heard and what she'd feared and what she'd always, with the specific suspicion of a woman who'd never quite approved of the son-in-law, been prepared to believe. The truth was simple and available, and it required exactly one direct conversation with Vanessa to confirm. Marcus had tried to have that conversation from a Marriott parking lot on a Wednesday night and been told by Elena to not say her sister's name. The truth waited, as truth generally does, with the patience of something that does not require belief to remain true. The 6 months after that Wednesday had a texture Marcus would later find difficult to describe to people who hadn't lived through something similar. The specific, compound weight of being simultaneously innocent and unheard, of having your entire domestic life replaced overnight with a hotel room and then a furnished apartment on the east side, of moving through the world carrying an accusation that everyone in Elena's orbit believed and that he had no way to refute in a forum where refutation would register. He tried, twice, to reach Vanessa directly. The first attempt produced no response. The second produced a text that said only, "This isn't a good time," which told Marcus that Vanessa knew exactly what had been assumed, and was either unwilling or unable to correct it, and that whatever the truth of her situation was, she had decided that Marcus absorbing the consequences was preferable to the alternative. He sat with that for a long time. He sat with it in his furnished apartment, in the evenings after the work was done, in the specific quiet of a space that contained none of his history, no photographs, no accumulated objects, none of the material evidence of a life built with someone. He sat with the profound unfairness of it, the almost abstract wrongness of having your character indicted by someone who knew the accusation was false and chose silence anyway. And then, because Marcus Thompson had learned from every person who had shaped him, his father, who turned up to work regardless of what the previous day had been, his grandmother, who said that pain was information, not identity, Vivian, who had shown him in 14 years of professional relationship what it looked like to convert adversity directly into forward motion, he turned away from the unfairness and toward the work. The work, at that moment, was a project he'd been developing for 2 years that had stalled not for lack of merit but for lack of his full attention, the divided attention of a man whose domestic life required a constant, low-level expenditure of energy that he'd never fully accounted for until it stopped being required. The project was a data analytics platform designed for small and mid-sized healthcare providers. practices that were drowning in patient data they couldn't pass, couldn't leverage, couldn't convert into the operational intelligence that the big hospital systems with their enterprise software were using to reduce costs and improve outcomes. Marcus had seen the gap clearly for years, had the technical architecture mostly built, had a prototype that worked. What he hadn't had was the 6 uninterrupted hours a day that the final push required. He had them now. Vivian watched the acceleration from her position, which was close and attentive, and said very little about it. She understood that Marcus Thompson working at this velocity was Marcus Thompson converting something, and that the conversion was healthy, and that her job was to make sure the output was properly structured and protected rather than to process with him what was being converted. She did, in the second month, say one thing. The platform valuation, if you go to market now, is in the range of 30 to 40 million, she said, during one of their weekly check-ins. If you wait 12 months and execute the hospital system partnerships we've been developing, that number becomes something different. How different? Marcus asked. Vivian named a figure. Marcus was quiet for a moment. 12 months, he said. Give or take, Vivian said. Depending on the partnerships and the market. Then we wait 12 months, Marcus said, and went back to work. He did not, in 6 months, tell Elena any of this. She had thrown him out of his home based on a lie and had not called once to ask whether the lie was true. He had no obligation to update her on what the silence was producing. He did update Vivian, daily, because that was the relationship. He did update Devon, his lead developer, whose faith in the platform had survived 2 years of intermittent progress and who now, with Marcus's full and undivided attention, was working with the productive intensity of someone who'd been given everything he'd been waiting for. He updated his father's photograph, which he'd framed and put on the wall of the furnished apartment's living room, the one good object in an otherwise impersonal space, speaking to it occasionally in the way of a man who misses someone and has decided the form of the conversation matters less than the fact of it. Otherwise, Marcus Thompson was quiet for 6 months. And then, on a Tuesday morning in the 5th month, a hospital system in Nashville signed a partnership letter of intent that changed the platform's valuation in exactly the direction Vivian had predicted, and Marcus called her and she said, simply, "It's time," and Marcus said, "I know." That was the week Elena began calling. The first call came on a Thursday. Marcus saw her name on his phone and felt, not what he'd expected to feel, which was some mixture of hurt and anger and the adrenaline of a long-awaited moment. What he felt was tiredness, the specific tiredness of a man who has processed something thoroughly and emerged on the other side and is now being asked to return to the beginning of the processing. He let it go to voicemail. Elena did not leave a voicemail. She called again in 20 minutes. He let that one go too. He was in a meeting with Vivian and Devon and the Nashville partnership team, and the meeting was the most important meeting of the platform's existence to date, and Marcus Thompson was not the kind of man who interrupted the most important meeting of his professional life to answer a call from a woman who had thrown his dress shirts out a window based on a lie. The calls continued through Thursday and into Friday with the escalating frequency of someone who had expected to be answered and was not processing the absence of response well. By Saturday morning, day 3, Marcus's phone had registered 22 missed calls from Elena's number. He showed the call log to Vivian on Saturday afternoon, when they met to review partnership documents. Vivian looked at it with the expression she wore when presented with information she found notable but unsurprising. "Do you know what happened?" she asked. On her end. "Why now? I have a guess," Marcus said. His guess was confirmed by a text from a number he didn't have saved. It turned out to be Vanessa's new number, which told Marcus something about the state of Vanessa's conscience. That arrived Saturday evening and read, "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I told Elena everything. The truth. I should have done it months ago. I know that doesn't fix anything. I'm so sorry." He read it twice. Felt something that was not satisfaction and not relief but something in the territory between them, something that had more to do with vindication than with victory, the feeling not of winning something but of being seen correctly after a long period of being seen wrong. He did not respond to Vanessa's text. He forwarded it to Vivian. The calls from Elena reached 47 by Sunday night. They reached 61 by Tuesday of the following week, by which point Marcus had listened to exactly 0 of the voicemails she'd begun leaving. He could see the voicemail count climbing in his notification center, each one a small red number incrementing upward, evidence of a person whose urgency was not being matched on his end. On Wednesday morning, the call count reached 84. Marcus was sitting at his desk in his East Side apartment, the one that had become, over 6 months, less impersonal than he'd expected. The framed photograph on the wall, the bookshelf he'd built slowly with thrift store finds and birthday gifts from people at work, the coffee maker that produced, he'd come to believe, genuinely better coffee than the one he and Elena had owned together, which was a small thing and also somehow not a small thing at all. He looked at the number 84 and thought about what it represented. Not just the calls, but the progression, the arc from a woman who had thrown a man's shirts into a hydrangea bush without a single clarifying question to a woman calling 84 times in 8 days. He thought about what Vivian would call it, information. He called Elena back. She answered before the first ring completed, which told him she'd been holding the phone. Marcus. Her voice had a quality he'd never heard in it. Not the social brightness, not the managed sharpness, not even the cold certainty of the night she'd thrown him out. It was the voice of a woman who had been awake for most of 8 days. Thank God. Marcus, please. Elena, he said. I know, she said, immediately, the two words carrying an enormous cargo. I know. Vanessa told me everything. She told my mother. She's been telling everyone. She's been. Marcus, I know I was wrong. I know I. Elena. He said her name again, and something in the tone of it, not cruel, not cold, just settled, the voice of a man who has finished a conversation in his own head and is now simply communicating the conclusion, made her stop. I want to say something, and I need you to let me say it. A silence. Then, okay, I did not touch your sister, Marcus said, and he said it not with the desperation of a man trying to convince someone but with the clean, flat authority of a man stating a fact he has lived with for 6 months and has never once doubted. I have never been anything to Vanessa except the person your family required me to be for her, the stable one, the one who showed up, the one who lent money and fixed cars and answered calls at midnight. That's it. That's the whole of it. And you threw me out of my home without asking me one question that would have taken 30 seconds to answer. Elena's breathing was audible on the line. I'm not saying this to hurt you, Marcus continued. I'm saying it because you called me 84 times and I think what you're calling to hear is that I'm still the man you thought I was, and the answer to that is yes. But Elena, you didn't believe I was that man when it mattered. You heard one thing, from one person, filtered through your mother, at 11 o'clock at night, and you threw my shirts in the bushes. Marcus, I was scared, he said. I know, I understood it even then. What I also understood, standing in the hydrangea bushes collecting my shirts, is that this had been building for years. Not the accusation, you couldn't have predicted the accusation. But the speed of it. How fast you got to conviction without defense. That's not something that happens overnight, Elena. That's the product of something that had been moving in you for a long time. Another silence, longer. I've been working, Marcus said, his voice shifting slightly, not softer, just less pointed, moving from the territory of reckoning to the territory of simple truth. These 6 months, I've been building something that I've been building for 2 years, and being thrown out of my house was, in a way I didn't expect and am not grateful for exactly, the thing that let me finish it. He paused. Vivian Hayes. You know Vivian, she's been managing the business development. We signed a partnership letter of intent with a hospital system in Nashville last month. There are 2 more in discussion. The platform valuation, at last count, is in the range of, he named the number. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. Marcus, Elena said, barely audible. I'm telling you this not because it changes what happened, he said, but because you've called me 84 times and I think at least part of what's driving that is that you've heard things, from people who know people, about what I've been doing. And I want you to have it directly, from me. I don't want there to be ambiguity about the sequence of events. I built this while you were not calling me. I built this in the silence you created. And I want you to understand that clearly. Can I see you? Elena asked. Her voice was very small, the voice of a woman who has understood something irreversible and is still searching, with the desperate hope of someone who hasn't fully accepted it yet, for a way to reach back. Yes, Marcus said. Once. There's something I need to say in person. They met at a coffee shop. Neutral ground, public, the specific choice of a man who understood that some conversations benefit from an audience even when the audience is strangers. Elena arrived before him and was sitting at a corner table with a coffee she hadn't touched, and she looked at him when he came through the door with an expression that contained more than he could catalogue in a single reading. Guilt, certainly, and sorrow, and underneath those, something that was still trying to be hope, still trying to negotiate with the way things were toward the way they might be made. She looked tired. She looked like someone who had spent 6 months without the thing she'd thrown away and had found the absence instructive. Marcus sat down across from her. He set his phone on the table between them, screen up, and opened a voicemail, not one of hers. His. "This is from Vanessa," he said. "She left it 3 days ago. I want you to hear it, because I think you need to hear it from her," in her voice, with no mediation. He pressed play. Vanessa's voice came through the speaker, halting and genuine, the voice of someone who had prepared what she wanted to say and was finding that preparation insufficient to the emotional weight of actually saying it. She talked for 4 minutes. She named the father of her child, a man in her social circle whom Elena had met once, at a birthday party. She explained what she'd said to their mother, what she'd meant by it, what she hadn't meant, what she should have corrected immediately and hadn't because she'd been scared and overwhelmed and had, in her fear, made a choice that was as wrong as anything she'd ever done. She said Marcus's name 3 times, each time with the specific quality of someone restoring something to its correct position. She said she was sorry. She said it several ways, all of them insufficient and all of them clearly genuine. The voicemail ended. Elena's eyes were wet. She'd been wet-eyed since somewhere in the 2nd minute of the recording, and she hadn't moved to hide it, which was, Marcus thought, the most honest thing she'd offered him in the entirety of this. "I'm so sorry," she said, when the silence had held long enough. "I know," Marcus said. "What I did to you was a reflection of something that was already there," Marcus said. "Elena, I've thought about this for 6 months. Not obsessively. I had too much work to do obsessively, but clearly. And I don't believe the accusation created what happened to us. I think the accusation revealed it. The speed, the certainty, the not asking." He looked at her, at this woman he'd loved and married and built a life with that had not, in the end, been built on the foundation either of them had believed. "You made me a prosecution without a defense. That's not something that comes from nowhere." "I know," she said. "So here's what I want to tell you in person," Marcus said. He reached into the jacket he was wearing. A good one, a recent one, the kind he'd started wearing since the Nashville partnership, since the life that was the correct size for who he was had started to be accessible, and placed an envelope on the table. Elena looked at it. "Divorce papers," she said. "Not a question. Vivian handled everything. The house is yours. I'm signing it over, no contest. The settlement is fair. I've worked through all of it carefully, and I want this to be clean, Elena. I want this to be the thing that finally lets us both have the life that's actually ours instead of the one we were performing." Elena put her hand on the envelope but didn't open it, didn't take it. Her fingers rested on it as if she could read its contents through the paper, as if the right kind of contact might produce a different outcome. "Is there anything," she said, her voice very careful, "anything at all?" "No," Marcus said, gently and completely. "Not because I hate you. Not even because I don't understand why it happened. But because I spent 6 months building a life that fits, Elena, and I'm not going back to one that doesn't. You deserve a man who doesn't have to prove himself to you after 7 years. And I deserve a partner who asks the question before they make the conviction." She took the envelope. The Vindication Foundation. The name had been Jordan's suggestion, 4 months after the Nashville partnership, when Marcus was describing what he wanted to build and Jordan had said, simply, vindication. That's what it's really about. Opened in Atlanta on a Tuesday that Marcus chose deliberately, because Tuesday was the day everything had changed, and he believed in the symbolism of return. Its mission was pointed and specific, as Marcus's missions always were: legal support, counseling, and community for men who had been falsely accused, wrongfully displaced, or publicly condemned on the basis of unverified claims. Men who had been thrown out of their homes by the people who were supposed to know them. Men who had collected the shirts from hedges in November and driven to Marriott parking lots and made calls at midnight to the one person who would answer and say, "Tell me." The Foundation's intake form asked 3 questions. The third was, "What did you build while no one was watching?" The answers, which Marcus read himself in the first month of operation, 67 applications in 30 days, which told him everything he needed to know about the scale of the need, were extraordinary in their range and the common thread. Men who had gone back to school. Men who had finished the business plan. Men who had written the book, started the nonprofit, learned the language, built the thing. Men who had converted the worst period of their lives into the foundational period, the way a building's foundation is only visible in the excavation before the structure rises. He read every application in his new office. The real one, in the real building, not the Marriott parking lot or the furnished apartment, with the coffee maker that produced coffee better than what he'd had before, and the photograph of his father on the wall, and the southeast-facing windows that caught the morning in a way that made every workday begin with something that felt, if you were willing to call it what it was, like grace. On a morning in the foundation's second month, Vivian came by with documents and coffee and the expression she wore when she had something to say that wasn't purely professional. The Nashville system signed the full agreement, she said. 2 more hospital groups initiating conversations. The platform's value at this trajectory. She stopped herself. You know the number. I know the number, Marcus confirmed. How are you? She asked, with the directness that was her natural mode. Marcus thought about the question with the same honest attention he gave everything. He thought about a November night and a burgundy suitcase and dress shirts in a hydrangea bush, about 6 months in a room with his father's photograph and Devon and the work that had needed his full attention and finally received it, about 84 calls and a coffee shop and an envelope taken with shaking hands. He thought about clarity, the specific, unexpected clarity of a man who had had everything stripped away and discovered that what remained was more than enough, was, in fact, more than he'd known was there. Good, Marcus said, and meant it without qualification, without the asterisk of everything that had produced the good, without any of the complexity that had preceded the simplicity of the word. Just good, clean, true. Outside, Atlanta was doing what it did on mornings in spring, the light coming in at angles that found every surface worth finding, the same city it had been on the worst night of his life and the same city it was on this morning, indifferent to both in the way that cities are, their continuity the backdrop against which a man's private earthquakes play out and resolve and eventually, if he does the work and waits with the patience of someone who knows the work is the argument, are replaced by something solid enough to build on. Marcus Thompson set down his coffee, opened the first application in the morning's folder, and read the name of a man in Memphis who had been thrown out of his house in February on the basis of a misunderstanding, who had spent 3 months building a software company in his sister's spare bedroom, and who wanted, more than funding or legal support, though he needed both, who wanted simply to be believed by someone who had no reason to doubt him. Marcus picked up his pen. He began to write, "We believe you. We're here. Tell us the rest." And the morning held, and the work continued, and Marcus Thompson, falsely accused, thrown out, rebuilt, vindicated, wrote the words that he had once needed and not received, and gave them now to someone who needed them, and understood that this, precisely this, was what the worst night of his life had been clearing the ground to make possible. He signed his name, and it was, at last, enough. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If it moved you, like, share, and comment on the lessons you took from it. Let me know where you're watching from, and I'll see you in the next video.